All right, today we're going to continue from where we left off last week. This will be session 2 in a series of 10 sessions on anger management. And in the process, we will be looking at a lot of other things as we take this journey into the art and science of mind management. Okay, now, with no further ado, let's just quickly recapitulate some of the things we said last week about anger. Remember, we left off, we were talking about the categories of anger. We were talking about our anger at others. Right. And we talked about some of the techniques and strategies that we can use for dealing with that. And today we want to pick up immediately on category number 2, which is others. Anger at us. Now, the reason that these two categories are so important is because 65% of all the homicides that occur in this country occur within the context of these two areas of anger. Either we kill somebody because we get so angry at them, or they get angry at us and kill us. So the thing to realize is that the greatest threat to your well-being, in fact, according to the Center for Disease Control, the second greatest threat to your life is violence. And it is violence within the context of close personal relationships. And that should make sense to everybody, because remember, if you are a husband and a wife are in a day-to-day, very often hour-by-hour relationship. And remember I said last time that conflicts are inevitable, right? There's no such thing as a conflict-free relationship. They don't exist. You're going to have some conflict. And if you don't know how to manage that conflict, if you don't know how to resolve that conflict, and it goes on being repressed, suppressed, and accumulating, then it's going to erupt, it's going to explode, and the net result will be somebody will wind up killing themselves or killing someone else. So we have to keep that in mind whenever we talk about these two categories. So we have to get these two. Very, very important. So today we're going to go a little bit back over this one, and we're going to talk about this one, and we'll proceed from that point on. Now, how do we normally deal with others' anger at us? What makes that so difficult? And yes, because when other people get angry at us, we have a lot of difficulty in managing the other person's anger at us. Why is that?
Most of the time people don't want to admit they're wrong.
Right. The problem becomes your ego mythology. Now you remember before that we talked about the fact that we all have this image of ourselves, usually what we call self-esteem, that is usually not rooted in any reality at all. And very often what happens is that when another person is angry at us, it threatens our own image of ourselves. Because why? We've been walking around thinking we're perfect. We've been walking around thinking we're full of all these virtues and good, high spiritual qualities. And the other person is actually getting angry at us, and we cannot process that. How can you get angry at me, perfect as I am? How can you get angry at me? I'm your mother, I'm your husband, I'm your wife. So sometimes, simply by definition of the role that we are in relationship with the other person, dictates to us a lot of false material, adds a lot of false conclusions about ourselves into this ego mythology of ours. So I'm your mother, how dare you get angry at me? You can't get angry at me. So what we have millions of children suppressing their anger at their parents. And what do we say about suppressed anger over time? It's going to do what? It's going to erupt. So is it any wonder that by the time that boy or that girl hits adolescence, and now they're 6 feet tall, they're taller than you, they're way more than you, is it any wonder now that they begin to vent and act out all of that suppressed, repressed anger? So it makes it very difficult for us to handle other people's anger, simply because it threatens our ego mythology. It threatens and challenges the image that we have formed of ourselves, which is very often totally inaccurate. So we have to remember that we have to manage our ego too. I want you to see how if you do not manage those other four negative states of mind that we're talking about, remember we talked about anger as being one of them, right? But greed was talked about a little bit, lust, you all remember all of this, attachment, right? And egotism. You can see how if you don't manage these, it's going to be very hard to manage anger. There's sort of like a group, a complex here. So what management you do in one place will help you in the other place. But it's very critical that in managing others' anger that you have to definitely learn how to manage your own egotism. You're going to have a hard time managing other people's anger if you don't manage your own egotism. And when I say manage your own egotism, I simply mean to continually adjust your own estimation of who you are based on some reality. Last time we talked about the benefit, or was it last time here? It must have been in satsang. We talked about the benefits of journalizing. So with those of you that was at satsang, remember that we talked extensively then about how to use journalizing, writing, to help you control this egotism, you see, so that it doesn't get out of hand. And so when we have this problem with our ego mythology being totally out of focus and out of perspective, whenever other people get angry at us, we usually get angry right back. Is that right? That's right. We remember last time we said in category number 1, when we talked about our anger at others. I remember I should have mentioned, if I didn't mention to you, we can always tell when we are handling our anger at the other inappropriately because the other will always get angry. Anytime you are angry at somebody and you're trying to manage that anger at that person, you're confronting them with your anger, you're trying to tell the truth, or you're trying to use one of the techniques or whatever, or you're trying to even use the technique that has been your dominant style since childhood. If that is simply producing more anger in the other person, you are doing something absolutely wrong. Shut your mouth. Call time out. Because you're going to escalate the conflict and you're going to wind up getting hurt or hurting somebody, saying something that you regret, etc., 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 aren't you? Right? That means you're doing it wrong. Does it make you a bad human being? No, not at all. It simply means that you just got to practice this stuff. Similarly, when the other person is angry at you, if you mismanage the other person's anger, you know it because you get angry. If a person is expressing their anger at you, confronting you, and you find yourself welling up into a state of anger, that means you are handling the other person's anger absolutely wrong. Because you're having a perception, aren't you, that the other person is attacking you, and that they're being unfair to you, and that this is not right, and this is so forth and so on, right? And what is triggering your perception and interpretation of that other person's behavior or commentary? Your mythology. Right. Your mythology is doing that, right? This person is treating me unfair. They criticizing me. How dare they criticize me? And have you ever noticed, all of us, it's true of all of us, whenever somebody criticizes us, even though small, we immediately, you see, leap into a posture of defense, right? It's all, and in fact, even if it's not small, if somebody is criticizing us and it's a major one, we can't really understand why y'all making a big deal out of this little thing. You see, it's just a little bitty tiny fault in me. So even when we have these major faults and major shortcomings and major imperfections that is really causing a lot of grief and misery in the other person's life, we tend to, through a process of running it through our ego mythology, reduce it to a penny. But you don't got no business getting mad at me. Sometimes we ask them, why are you angry at me? What is the proof? What grounds are you standing on? You know, give me some evidence.
Well, why are you making such a big deal?
Why are you making such a big deal out of this here? Because that's a little thing.
I didn't do nothing.
I didn't do nothing. I'm perfect, right? There's no way that I could have did anything that could really cause you all this reaction because it's not in me. You know I wouldn't hurt nobody. You know me, right? But you done hurt somebody, right? So we tend to handle the other person's anger very inappropriately. And it's very difficult to come out of that until we start making certain adjustments in our ego mythology. And you remember I said that this ego mythology is fundamentally nothing but your esteem, isn't it? Nothing but your self-esteem. And when all you have is self-esteem and no self-respect, you become wholly dependent upon manipulating other people's opinions about you in order for you to have a felt sense of worth and value. So now, June, I have to force you to have a high opinion of me because I have nothing else to determine my own sense of worth other than your opinion. And I must make sure that that opinion stays high. And I'll kill you in order to do that. Because that feeling of worth and value is so critical to me, you see. So whenever we find ourselves immediately leaping to the defense, it is because we need that other person's opinion of us to stay way up there in order for us not to have feelings of worthlessness. So you have to understand that. So the first thing that you have to do in order to manage the other person's anger at you appropriately is that you got to depersonalize it. You got to depersonalize the other person's anger at you. By depersonalize, I simply mean don't take that stuff so personal. We take things far too personal. And you may be saying, well, Bhagwan, how can you not take it personal? Easy. Build some self-respect. Because my definition of taking a thing personal means precisely the following. Taking something personal means that you are interpreting it as a reflection on your value and worth as a human being. You are dealing with this as if it's an actual reflection on your value and worth as a human being. And I've already told you that your value and worth as a human being is unconditional, it is a priori, and given by virtue of the fact that you exist. Period. And the case is closed. So you're not now dependent upon the other person's critique. You don't take it personally. You can look at it objectively. And they may be right. They may be targeting in exactly on one of your faults, one of your shortcomings, and one of your imperfections that cause them a grievance, a legitimate grievance. And when that is the case, the appropriate thing to do is to what?
Apologize.
Of course. Apologize. Try to make restitution, you see. Negotiations become available. But in no case is there a reflection on your value and worth as a human being. That remains above all of the fray. So you have to really understand that the hardest thing to do in managing anger, in fact, managing anything else in the complex of other negative states that we've discussed, is to depersonalize these things. This is very, very hard to do because we have had such a long ego habit of personalizing everything. And it's very hard. The hardest thing in the world to get is this. That's why it's such a rare phenomenon. And even when you get into a state of self-respect, it's very hard to maintain it because that old conditioning and just the conflicts that arise in day-to-day relationship tends to knock you back into your ego mythology. So it's very hard to get in this state. But you can get into it, but it requires a lot of conscious, deliberate work. And the first part of that process begins with depersonalizing the other's anger at you. Don't take it personal. It is not a reflection on your value and worth as a human being. Now you're in a position to go to the next step. Now you can apply all of the other different techniques here. second thing that you can do once you have rooted yourself in a feeling of self-respect, which is really part one of a three-part process. The first thing you got to do is validate yourself, right? Validate yourself. That's the same thing as depersonalizing the other person's criticism. You're validating yourself. You're reminding yourself that I am a worthwhile human being in spite of my imperfection, my shortcoming, and my faults. Now, that's not just going to be debated. Now you can move into the situation because you rooted. You got something. Your self-respect is not a threat. You can hear this person now. Can you hear them when you think that your self-esteem is and worth and value is at risk here? You can't even hear that person. You immediately leap into the defense, right? But when you know that there is no threat to that stuff, now you can open up. You can move into the next stage where you can now validate the person's anger. You got to validate their anger. You have to acknowledge the fact that, okay, I see you angry. What has happened to make you so angry? I see you angry, and it's all right. And it's all right for you to be angry at me. It's okay. Because I'm not perfect. I'm not flawless. I have faults. I have shortcomings. It's okay for you to be angry at me. Most of us have never been allowed to be angry at nobody. From the time we were little children. And so when someone gives you the freedom to be angry at them, that's a big thing. That in itself goes a long way in calming them down. What happened? Let them start telling you their tale. We saw in the first category of anger that when you're angry, you get relief when you tell your tale, don't you? Right? And remember, it's your tale. It's your perception. It need not be rooted in any reality whatsoever. Let them tell their tale. By validating their anger, you can give them an opportunity to tell you their tale. What they perceive, what they feel, and what was it that made them angry, and all these other things. And they get relief from that. They get relief from that. And the third step is that you have to validate the person. Again, that is to make sure that they understand that because you get angry at me does not make you a bad human being. Does not make you worse. You're not a great sinner. Okay, you're not going to die and go to hell. You violated no moral law of the universe by getting angry at me. You validate the person. And this takes practice. We don't get this right the first time out, second time out, sometimes not even the 10th time out. And we don't have to get it perfect. We probably never will get it perfect. We just have to get it good enough. Just good enough. And that becomes our aim and our objective. So these really constitutes the foundation of all other techniques that you can think of for managing the other person's anger. If you're doing all this right, okay, then you will come to a point where when it is legitimate, when they do have a legitimate basis for having a grievance with you, because your imperfection or shortcoming or fault has caused them a hurt, then you can apologize now. If you understand this process, you can apologize. But when I say apologize, I don't mean to use apology as a political tool, right? Because very often that's all that we do, don't we? The apology is not really sincere, right? When the apology is sincere, there's really a component of remorse, isn't it? You're really sorry. You can't have an apology without remorse. That's not possible. You have to really be honest about it. You're really sorry. And you are full of remorse. And when you are full of remorse, you do not do the thing again. Please make a note of that. Whenever you apologize to a person for something that you have done or said that is a legitimate basis for them having a grievance with you, and you are genuinely sorry about that, you don't do that no more. Okay? You don't do that no more. I remember when I was a younger man, one of my best friends, name was Chucky, had a little sister. And I remember, I don't know how old I was, maybe 19 or 20, I'm not sure now. But I do remember driving down one of the side streets over in our neighborhood, and there was a school there, Chalmers School, where all the kids went to. In fact, I went to the school. And I remember the school was getting down, and I'm just going down the street very slowly, and I remember these groups of kids running on the sidewalk, and I'm seeing them run toward me, and there's nowhere I can go, and one of the kids hit my car, just ran into the car, and it turned out to be Bobby Jean, this girl who was the sister of my best friend. And it was such a traumatic experience for me because I did not want to hit her. I couldn't avoid it. I was sorry. It wasn't planned. And I got out and I was, full of tears and everything. I was really remorseful. Now the next day I didn't go back down that street and hit Bobby Jean again. You see? I was sorry. I didn't want to do that. And there have been things that we've all done in our life, but we were really sorry about that. And we don't do that no more. So similarly, when a person has been, have a legitimate grievance against us, then, and we apologize, we need to be sorry and full of remorse and not do that. But when the apology is simply political and for a moment it diffuses the situation, and then the next day you come and do the same thing again for that person, now that person's anger reaction is going to be what? Even worse. They're really going to be pissed off this time. Because just yesterday they thought they had resolved this with you, and you turn around the next day and here you go again. Right? So we have to be genuine in that arena. Okay? So we have to, but you have to start with validating yourself. And I can't tell you enough about this necessity to depersonalize. So let me focus in on that again, because if you can't get yourself into a depersonalized state, you're not going to be able to do the rest of it. You're not going to have a presence of mind to do it. You're going to immediately be caught up in your own anger. And when we know when that happens, you're going to lose all rationality, all intelligence, and everything else will go right out of the window. So all your skills, in fact, will go right out of the windows with that. So we have to focus on this ability to depersonalize. The other's anger. Okay? Now, I've said depersonalizing simply means not taking it personal. It's not only true of another person's anger, but on a larger scale, this is a life skill to have, to apply across the board. When you fail on a job to get a promotion that you worked hard to get, right? And if you take that failure personal, you're setting yourself up for some self-anger, aren't you? Right? So I want you to understand that not only you're not to take anything out here personally. Now that's a big task. To take it, when depersonalized, it has two sides to it. It means that if you don't take their criticism of you, right? You don't take their criticism of you, you don't take their praise either. You can't do one or the other. You understand? To master the ability to stay in a state of depersonalization or detachment, okay, which is the opposite of attachment, you must neither be carried away when somebody praises you. Because again, you're taking that personal, isn't it? Oh, you really did this and you really smart in that. Now that's feeding your what? Your ego. It's feeding your ego mythology, right? That's all. You see? And the worst thing about it, that praise may have no relationship to your reality whatsoever. The person offering that praise may simply be a victim of your own propaganda, right? And they're praising you for a quality that you in reality don't even possess. And they're praising you for it now simply fuels the illusion that you really have the virtue or the quality, which means that you will now make no effort to really attain it because this person has said you got it, right? And when 10 people say you got it, you must have it, right? Right? So you shut down any effort on your behalf to really develop tolerance, to really develop patience, to really develop compassion, because you got 10 people who you have been successful in working your propaganda on. And they don't know because they never experienced you at the level of your reality. Just mean you did good with your propaganda. That's all. So you taking it personal, right? So even if you take praise personal, in the end, it will have a counterproductive effect on your ability to manage your anger as well as manage the balance of all the other negative states. Do you all understand that? Because it's a real subtle thing, all right? So if you don't understand it, let's go over it and squeeze it, because I want you to understand it this time. You do understand how you should not take a person's critique of you personally, right? Because it's not really a reflection on your worth and value as a human being. Someone said that you are no good, so-and-so, 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 because you didn't do this for me, right? You don't take that personally, right? It's not a reflection on your value and worth. Your value and worth is independent of that. Similarly, somebody praised you, right? You are also not to take that personally, because again, they could be misperceiving it altogether, right? They could be totally off the mark again. And then you have arrogated to yourself that ability when in fact you don't even have it. So you have to understand that. Not only that, once you start taking another person's praise personally, now you slowly become enslaved, don't you?
Enslaved to their opinion of you.
Right. And when that get out of control, you become a pleaser. You enter into the pleaser syndrome. And that's what happened to these people. Now, your whole life is spent trying to please these praise givers. Your whole life. You become absent from your own life. And all your energies are spent trying to please these other people. You got it now?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
You got it now.
Yes.
And that's how we fall into the pleasing syndrome. And very often, the people that makes up that small group are your significant other. They are your mother, your father, your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your best friend, your this. And these people have an extraordinary amount of power and control over you. And you don't even know it. And how is it that they have such a tremendous impact on you? Because you have empowered their praise and you have empowered their criticism. And with those two powers, you lose control over your life. It's really tragic. It's very tragic. Yes, sister.
What are some daily solutions to establishing self-respect and therefore not getting involved in personalizing criticisms? For example, if you say supervise a managed set store and it's failing, and so they look at the manager first.
Yes.
So it's very hard when that's criticized and said that the business is going down, the products are here, the customers are not coming, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
And then it's hard to divorce or to accept that, it seems to me, without personalizing, without saying, well, maybe I got some shortcomings.
Well, no, that's exactly what one has to conclude, that I do have some shortcomings, and I have some fault, and I do have some imperfection that is causing the collapse of this business. That's right. The phenomenon of failure is really going on. That's not unreal.
Right.
But I don't take it personally. It doesn't mean that when this thing fails, I'm going to blow my brains out. You see?
Although you were the cause,
Even-
accepting
you-
the reason for it
sure.
is not personal.
Right.
That's not taking
Responsibility is not taking it personally.
Okay.
Accepting responsibility for the consequences of your imperfection, your shortcoming, and your faults is not equivalent to taking anything personally.
Okay.
In fact, that is a spiritual growth, isn't it? Because aren't we to take responsibility for our imperfections, our shortcomings, and our faults, and the consequences there, right? But notice, Sister Kiva, how in your illustration, how most of us will react very different in that situation. And I would try to find everything. First of all, I don't want no responsibility for nothing that fails. You know, because if it fails, then that means I'm no good. You see the logic involved in that?
Right, right.
And what I'm saying is that that's the thing we have to avoid, because guess what? You're going to fail in life.
Plenty of times.
Plenty of times. If it's not in business, it will be in relationships, or maybe in both business and relationships. Right?
So you get it right.
That's right. So we're going to fail. It's inevitable, because we're not perfect. We're not flawless. We have faults. We have shortcomings. We are not omniscient. We are not omnipotent. We're going to fail. The problem is not failure. The problem is the mismanagement of failure.
Or how we take it or absorb
It's
it.
how personal.
Yeah.
Those who are not able to take it so personal that it cripples them, what do? They recover from their failure.
Yeah.
They get up. The business collapses. Okay, you cry and you go through it because these things hurt, naturally. But then after that is over with, your period of mourning is over with, you get up and you go on and you start business number 2. If you read the biography of a lot of successful people in business or in any area of life for that matter, you will find that very often their success is precluded by a whole strew and a whole series of failures. In fact, one of my observations is that only people who can manage failure can be successful. If you don't have the psychological and emotional foundation that enables you to handle failure, you seldom will be successful in any area of life. So, and that is a very good point, Sister Kiva, that you brought up, and that's appreciated, because, again, I don't want there to be any confusion. You know, depersonalizing does not mean avoidance of responsibility. It means just the opposite. You take full responsibility. Yes, ma'am.
What about when you're raising your kids and you're in a position to praise them for doing something good?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you keep them from becoming so attached to that they need that to thrive? How do you manage that? You know, because it's not a bad thing to praise.
No, it's not
kids,
a bad thing.
You know,
That's right. It's not a bad thing. The praise should be genuine, first of all. It should not be a tool. It should not be a gimmick, a technology that we use to manipulate the children. And that's how most of us use the praising of our children, don't we? Right? We use it to manipulate them. Right? It's not deep. It's not real. It's not authentic. Right? But authentic praise, there's nothing wrong with that. You see? Because you're the one that's making the perception. Right? Now, if I were talking to the child, I would tell the child, don't take your mom's praise personal, okay, right? Because then you'll have to take a criticism personal, right? It's very hard to do one without necessarily doing the other, right? But it's from you as a parent, we all have a right to praise. I have a right, I can praise you, right? Just don't take it personal. But that's my perception. That's what I'm seeing, and I'm responding to that. It's like I have that right, you see. I might see something in you that I consider to be a flaw, and I'll criticize you. Don't take that personally, right? At all. Enjoy them, thank them. You know how you handle this, so make it very clear. When praise and critique both come, just let it pass through you. Acknowledge it. Thank the person for praising you. You understand? Enjoy it and let it pass. Do not cling. Let it float through. Because you're going to get praised and you're going to get criticized. That's, again, it's a part of the reality of the dynamics of personal interactions like that. But you let it pass through you. One of the, in spiritual development, one of the techniques that the gurus and the masters have always given us is that whenever to handle this praise, because this is very difficult to handle. Because why? It really inflates ego. I mean, it really gets your ego big. Right? Just as this tears you down, right? This one floats you up, and it's very, very dangerous. And one of the things that the masters have always said, that whatever praise comes to you, pass it right on to the God. Don't take no credit for it. That's again a form of depersonalization, right? Accept it on behalf of that which is divine. Don't give any credit to this ego. You see?
I just wanted to make a comment when she was saying about with the children. Wouldn't this also work if you praise the behavior and not the child? You know, you praise what they do, but you don't praise them personally. Would
Yeah.
that help?
That can help something like that.
Depersonalize that.
Sure, it will help depersonalize. Same will work with criticism. You criticize the behavior, but you don't criticize the child. But whenever what we don't want to do is we want to minimize this whole phenomena of us deriving a sense of value and worth on anything other than the fact that you exist. We're going to try to keep and respect that. If you're a human being and you just have value, we don't want to get into you have to do this and you have to do that, or you only have value when you got all A's. But when you didn't get all A's on that report card, you had no value. We don't want that child to start falling into that cycle of associating their value as a person and as a human being and as your son or daughter with getting all A's. Because now you're setting them up, aren't you? Right? Mm-hmm. And that happens. One of the things, Sister Kiva, that most children suffer from is a lack of a felt sense of what I call enoughness. Most of our children don't feel good enough. And most of them don't feel good enough as a result of us, the way we are parenting. See my point? And this feeling of not being good enough, this lack of a sufficient experience of enoughness, is what we call self-contempt. And self-contempt, of course, is the opposite of self-respect. The feeling is that I'm really not good enough. You'd be surprised when we have parents that are, for instance, overcritical of their children. You could do this better. You could have done this better. You got all B's. Oh, you could have got all A's. You came in number 3. You could have came in number 1. So forth and so on. The child begins to build up a constant experience of not being good enough for my mama. I'm not good enough to be my mama's son, or my mama's daughter, or my father's son, or my father's daughter. And this feeling of not being good enough, you see, becomes sometimes inescapable states of self-contempt. You don't feel good. And the whole logic arises out of this sense of self-contempt. If I'm not good enough, then it don't make no difference what happens to me. You see? So you see a whole process begin to develop. We have to make sure that the child has a continuous, as best we can. Now we're going to get it perfect, folks. Of course, we're not going to get it perfect. But we have to still consciously and deliberately style to validate that child. Not only our child, we have to validate each other in our relationships, don't we? Our husband and wife need to have the same feeling of emotions. It's a human need, and we never outgrow that. So we have to, again, really, truly understand this. But I'm happy that you are beginning to understand that this depersonalization process is something that has to be applied across the entire spectrum of life. If our businesses fail, do not take that stuff personal. If they succeed, do not arrogate the success to your ego. Don't take it personal. Pass the credit. You see? And so forth and so on. And in that way, you begin to get a kind of center. You begin to get a certain balance. The African mystics and sages has called it ma'at. This kind of state of balance. See? Where praise neither knocks you off your center, nor do critique and criticism knock you off your center. You remain centered. And you can know that when you are living your life and you're not centered, you can feel it. You can feel your life off balance. Deep down inside, you can feel it that, you're not balanced. You're leaning too much one way. And we have to get back to the center. We have to stay balanced in our own relationship with ourselves. And we don't get knocked off our course. When we fall into the praising, we're going to fall into the pleasing syndrome. You see? We're going to fall into the pleasing syndrome. And then that's a very tragic situation to be in. So this whole depersonalization thing has to really be understood. And you have to do that. One of the interesting things that in ancient times, there was a whole deeper understanding of this here. And in fact, in ancient Africa, in Egypt and Nubia and all throughout Africa for that matter, and incidentally throughout Asia as well, in any culture where it was still close to reflecting the wisdom of the indigenous people, you will find something very interesting. The larger concept of depersonalization, or let's put it like this, another form of depersonalization is what I call de-isolation. And all of these things are processes that you got to be able to do to yourself. You got to depersonalize and you got to de-isolate yourself. Now I know this may sound a little strange, but bear with me. Because these are subtle things to get. You see, they're subtle things to get. The isolation is painful to begin with. In fact, one of the classical definitions of egotism, remember when I talked last time, I gave you a fundamental definition of ego, and then we added a secondary definition of ego with arrogance and all that. But that foundational definition of egotism has to do primarily with the phenomena of isolating yourself. Egotism is a contraction of your being. You isolate yourself, right? And even in that process of isolation, it causes pain. But now I show you how this isolation then begins to permeate the whole thing, and how the wise priests and scholars of ancient Africa treated not only personal problems, but even medicinal problems. This is strange. For instance, when a woman may get a snake bite, okay? And they will go to the priest scholar, right? For treatment, because they were also doctors, and as well as priests and scholars, for their snake bite. And the first phase of the physician-priest treatment was not in applying any ointment to the snake bite at all. They told him a story. This is very interesting. They would look and see what was the nature of the illness. Snake bite, they had snake bite stories, right? And so what they would do, they would go and they would give one of the papyruses, or they knew it by heart, many of them, and they would sit down with this patient who just got a snake bite, and now they would tell him the story of Ra, and how Ra was bitten by a snake, and how that snake bite was a part of the process of Ra's spiritual development, and so forth and so on. You see, what he began to do was to de-isolate the event and cause the individual to reassociate, right, the crisis with a heroic phenomenon. And so now already he's bringing the whole gestalt of that patient into a whole different state. Because now the man is almost glad he got snake bite. You see, because he's on his way to becoming a rock. He's on his way to becoming a hero. He's on his way to becoming a hero, right? And when the mind sees the illness differently, then it changes the whole way it relates to that illness. Because the mind has a capacity to heal. And so now, after telling him the story, then he rubbed a little ointment on the bite. Thank you guys. You see? So they use drama and mythology in a medicinal way, even to take care of snake bites. Again, the concept was to de-isolate yourself. First, now if I tell you, for instance, in the example that Kiva gave with the failure of a business and the person's in that, I've showed you how to depersonalize it. I can also say, now, let me treat that crisis, because that's a crisis, by de-isolating it. And now I'll tell people the story of Madam C.J. Walker, who started her businesses, and she used up all her money, and she failed, and she had to do this, and she had to do that, and on the 10th try, Madam C.J. Walker became. Now I'm shifting your identity. I am associating it, reassociating it, and now you kind of proud you failed because you that much closer to becoming like Madam C.J. Walker, and the whole experience is shifted. Now, Maharaji, my own Guru Sahib used to tell us that by using this ability to de-isolate yourself and depersonalize yourself, you're very often able to turn what otherwise would have been life wounds into diamonds. You now are equipped with heavy shoes and you can walk through the thorns of life. And the things that will knock another person off their emotional balance is almost impervious to you. You can handle crisis. You can handle disappointments. You can handle the collapse and the dissolving of expectation. You can handle all of that because you are relating to even suffering in a different way. And the Bible, all of the stories in the Bible, and it is by no accident that most of the teaching in the Bible was done in story form. It's powerful because the ideal is to get you to identify with Jacob or somebody else, or Daniel in that lion den. And that reassociates the whole experience, and you start feeling like Daniel now. And that gives you the strength to handle the crisis. Do you follow this here? So these are very ancient techniques that has been known from time immemorial on how to manage even something as devastating as the suffering and misery that comes to you. There are alternatives to suicide, and there are alternatives to suicide, you see. So I spent a little time on this because this is so important, because one of the things you have got to do as an individual, because I reminded you, we're just not meeting academically here to kill time, right? Because there's so many other things you can be doing. I want you to really get the skills. And the two most important ones that you're going to need, not only to manage your anger and others' anger at you, you're going to need this ability to depersonalize and de-isolate the events. Okay? And that's very, very important. And we will come back to this theme again, I'm sure, throughout the balance of the sessions. We were talking at the top of the lecture about dealing with category number 2, others' anger at us. And we begin to see some of the techniques for dealing with that. What are some of the other things we can do to manage others' anger at us appropriately? And by appropriate, I mean in a way that is non-violent and psychologically healthy. Or while you're thinking of that, it may take you a while, let's look at what are the wrong ways to handle the other's anger at us.
To be defensive, get angry at them.
Right. First thing, never get defensive. Defensive is the exact opposite of depersonalization. When you get defensive, you are really taking it personal. I mean, big time, right? And the more defensive that the person gets, the more they're under the influence of that ego mythology. You can almost measure a person's ego, can't you? Whenever they are confronted with another person's anger or critique, they will explode. Have you known people like that? Huh? Right? They explode because they got so much of this stuff. And they have so little of this stuff, self-respect, that now they are in a crisis. And they got to defend my image at all costs. Right? You know someone like that?
Oh,
We all do.
Go ahead, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you a question. If someone is accusing you of something and there's falsehood in that and all of that,
Yes.
and I have been known to just, I cannot take that.
Yes.
And I have to let them know that immediately.
That is not true. And again, because these people are tearing down our whole image, our whole reputation.
Right.
You got to defend your reputation, right? You got to defend your innocence, right? And your integrity, right? You got to defend it. It's almost like defending your life. It's like they're killing you. In a way, isn't it? That's what it feels like. And in a sense, they are. They're killing your ego. You feel your ego dying. You feel your ego being shattered. And it feels like dying. And you react. It is almost as if the person is physically got a shooting at you. You go into that hyper defensive posture. Because this stuff. Right? This stuff. If you have self-respect, okay, so what? Kabir Sahib says that you should thank, Kabir, the great mystic, said you should thank people who criticize you because they point out your weaknesses. You want to know. You also are interested in your shortcomings and your faults. And if you got a wife or a husband that is pointing out your shortcomings every 2 minutes, you should be grateful because they're helping you.
Suppose they're wrong.
Suppose they're right. And even if they are wrong, so what? Does that affect this? Does a person need anybody to corroborate their possession of virtue in order to have the experience of the possession of that virtue?
It should.
You won't. You have to understand that this phenomenon called self-respect is a very different thing. And the experience of the actual possession of character is so indubitable and absolute. You need no confirmation from nobody. It's like when you wake up in the morning, no one has to tell you, June, you're awake. You don't have to go and ask anybody, am I awake? Have I woke up yet? No. The sheer act of awakening is proof. You need no confirmation from anybody. And if you awake and somebody say, well, June, you sleep, you discount. Instantly. Don't even bother you. At all. It triggers nothing defensive in you. At all. Because you are rooted in an experience that is indubitable. Cannot be doubted. There are certain experiences that transcends your capacity to doubt in yourself. Self-respect is one. There's no way to doubt it. It has that quality. So, you're right. Again, the whole effort to prove them wrong. You got to prove them wrong. It means that what? You're trying to hang on to something. What is that something you're trying to hang on to?
Self-image.
Yeah, your self-image and the reputation. Your reputation. You know, your reputation. The illusion that you've created and have been interacting with another human being. Right? And if that thing is destroyed, now my God, they're going to see you naked. It's like being stripped naked. You start feeling powerless, don't you? Out of control. Notice on the whole thing. And that is what triggers the anger. Because you've taken it too personal. You've given it far more importance than it should have. And people explode out of that defensiveness. So that is guaranteed, you know, to trigger the other person anger. Does it trigger the other person anger? Have you ever noticed? When you explode on them, what happens to them? Do it calm them down? And who anger is it? Is it yours? No. It's the other person anger. Who needs to relieve? The other person. It is almost like if my wife came to me and she has cut her arm and she comes in the house and she's crying, and she says, I just cut my arm here. The appropriate thing for me to do is to try to administer some first aid or something, right? Do I go into defense? Well, you know, I didn't cut you, and I had nothing to do with cutting you, and it wasn't my fault that I wasn't responsible. What kind of reaction is that? My reaction is to give her first aid. It has nothing to do with me. My arm not cut. She's the one hurt. She's the one that needs first aid. She needs help. And if I love her, that's what I give her. I won't go into this kind of nonsense that I didn't cut you, it wasn't my fault. You see, some of us are wrongophobic. These are some of the illnesses that plague that you'll find lurking in all our ego mythologies. We're wrongophobic. We can't stand to be wrong. Can't be wrong. Because to be wrong means what? You ain't perfect. To be wrong means that you're not as intelligent as you thought you were. To be wrong means you're not omniscient. And you can't handle that because you've been thinking that I am perfect and I am omniscient and I'm never wrong. And even if I am wrong sometimes, I'm not wrong about this. Right? Wrongophobic. The other one, faultophobic. You can't have anything that's being your fault. Nothing can ever be your fault. You can accept no fault at all. Here, these are symptoms of an exaggerated ego. So now when that other person is angry at you, they got to prove how it's your fault. Prove that it's my fault. Where's your evidence? Get your attorney, right? And let's go to court on this matter. Because you got to prove to me that I'm the one at fault. And with the faultophobic, you can never bring enough evidence against them. Because they will use whatever intelligence they got to dismiss it. It's groundless. You have no case. It's like going to court, right? They put you through that Perry Mason syndrome. They put you on trial to prove where
So
they're
how do
from.
you deal with them? You just let them vent.
Well, this is us. It's not them. These are symptoms of us when we are mismanaging the other person's anger, you see? And we're the one that's doing all this stuff. We're the one that's getting defensive, and et cetera, et cetera. And again, I was tying that into the relationship. The intensity of the defensive reaction is directly proportional to the degree of a person's inaccuracy in their being captive in their ego mythology. It's a direct relationship. Because what is humility? Have you ever thought about it? What is humility? What is humility? Humility has often been talked about as the antidote to egotism, right? That we have to be more humble. We have to practice more humility. And humility is simply the realization that I have imperfections, shortcomings, and fault. Humility is more than the assumption that I have imperfections, shortcomings, and fault. Humility is a direct knowledge of your shortcomings, your imperfections, and your faults. Please make a note of that. I don't want you to be confused because Reverend C.T. Chicken Wing and Pastor Rib Tip have misled thousands of people on what constitutes the genuine phenomena called humility. Humility is precise, accurate knowledge of your imperfections and your shortcomings and your faults. It's no assumption, right? It's not this flowery, poetic nonsense that people talk about. Oh, you know, I'm so humble. In what way are you humble? They can't tell you. Precisely, what is the nature of your humility? What is it? Actually, they arrogate to themselves humility to pump up their ego. Now, humility as a virtue is co-opted by the egomaniac, right? Hence, people who go around claiming to be so humble are usually what? The opposite. They're more egotistic. Because now you wear your humility to the best. Yeah, I'm humble. I'm humble if you read. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. Right? And they even got that whole act. They They know how to act. You see them, and they can act out their humility. They're quiet and they're demure. I mean, it's really deep, right? But that's not humility. You see, that's egotism masquerading as humility. And it stinks and it's ugly, right? And whenever life throws you into a situation where your precise knowledge of your imperfections and shortcomings is necessary, you fail. Because you don't have the real stuff. You don't have the humility. So we have to begin to understand how all this works. And I'm focusing, as I said at the outset, on these two categories a lot. I'm emphasizing them simply because most of the pain and misery that two human beings experiences is because they do not possess the skills to manage their anger, nor do they possess the skills to manage the other person's anger that they're in relationship to, and the net result is misery. Just pure, unadulterated misery. I mean, it destroys both parties' life. Yes.
That example you gave about how if your wife came in the house with a cut on her arm, and how you could do two things. You could say, oh, I'm not responsible for getting the cut on your arm and stuff like that. Tell me about that kind of person. I have to interact with somebody like that, and I don't have a clue why somebody would react like that to begin with. I don't even know where that's coming from.
Again, it's the key to understanding those kind of bizarre actions is to understand this person's whole. You have to look into their ego mythology. You have to look at, and remember I said already that all this is self-esteem that is very often not rooted in any reality whatsoever. And this is all they have. You have to understand a person that is just limited to self-esteem, to these opinions that they have formed about themselves, their fantasies, their goals. And there's nothing wrong with self-esteem. Now, please don't misunderstand me. Self-esteem constitutes our goals. And there's nothing wrong with having the goal to be compassionate, and the goal to be tolerant, and the goal to have all of these qualities. Nothing wrong with that. But we shouldn't confuse the goal to have something with the actual possession of it. And people who have only self-esteem have set for themselves very high spiritual goals, moral goals, ethical goals, but they have attained none of them very often. And now, this thing has to be clung to because we have to have some kind of sense of identity. It's absolutely critical.
And this is what they're doing in that kind of response.
Yeah, they're hanging on this, they're protecting their identity. Now, let's say that if in here they have the thing of perfection.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Then that alone means that they could never be at fault of anything. It's even before you accuse them of something, they will tell you immediately, it's not my fault. They will enter the room and let everybody know anything go wrong in here, it's not my fault. Now we can proceed, right? Because it's that critical. It's like breath. They got to have it. You see, they're clinging, they're tied to this thing. False as it is, but it's some center. It's some sense of who I am. And their sense of who they are is so out of whack, right? That anything that threatens them, the least little thing threatens, they're threatened. Now if you look at them wrong, right?
What you looking at me?
They'll get angry. What do you mean? They get hot, right?
Yeah.
They get angry. She's looking at me like, you know what I mean? Don't. Because they've interpreted that automatically as a threat to the maintenance of this false identity. You can't even look at it. It's really sick. Usually they become paranoid. When it goes too far, now they become paranoid. Now everybody trying, not only they look, everybody trying to hurt me now. It gets really blown out of proportion. Right? Everybody's against me. Everybody's trying to sabotage me. Everybody trying to do this to me. Or the corollary, nobody will help me. It's the same paranoia, right? Nobody will help me. Same thing as everybody's against me. Same illness, same exaggeration. Now, if there any thing that you didn't get on the first two before we move on to the third one, because this thing is kind of sequential. If you don't get the other ones, I'm going to lose you down the road.
You just talked about the wrong way. You didn't talk about the right way.
I think we had talked about a lot of it before you guys got here.
Oh,
but just
okay.
pick up your notes, and they've all take good notes here. But these are the two very, very important categories that we have to begin with. So don't be shy. If there's something I need to go over again, we can go over it again, or you can always get the tape and review it again. If you don't have anything, now we're going to take a break. What time? What time do we normally take a break here?
1:30.
1:30? All right, about 15 minutes. All right, I'm not going to go into the next part yet. Let me just add a little few other dimensions to what I've said, so that after the break we can treat the next part fully. Okay, we'll have that whole hour. And I want to expand upon this other concept. These others who are angry at us are usually the significant others in our life, aren't they? Right? Again, to make us really understand that why it's so important for us not to take a cavalier attitude and say, well, I ain't concerned about managing other people. No, 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 no. The significant others in your life are the very people who anger you better learn how to manage, right? Because these are the people that you are traditionally in these close personal relationships with, right? They're your children. So what do you do when your children are angry at you? What do you do when your children, because your children are going to get angry at you. For those of us who got children, you know it. Now, how are you going to manage that? What would you do?
Well, sometimes they almost feel like, how dare you?
You have a right to be angry.
That's right, right?
Yeah, like, you ain't got no reason to be angry.
You have no reason to be angry, right? So we
Wait till you get a job.
That's right. We can get a job. So we
No,
normally.
that's invalidating.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
That's how we do it.
Well, we do.
We do. Now, what I asked you to do last time was to look at some dominant styles, right? That was a homework that I've asked you to do, right? And was to look at your dominant style for managing your anger. Is that right? And let's see what some of those dominant styles look like. How many, was there anybody here who had a dominant style of going into silence?
Yeah.
Huh? Silence, ignore, right?
Isolation.
Isolate. You isolate yourself. You
And
just
don't
the
put
word.
distance between you.
See you and don't
They
see.
become invisible.
Don't acknowledge it.
Ignore.
Ignore.
Uh-huh.
Totally. Right.
Yeah.
Now, how have those worked? Now, when you look back over your life, honestly now, do this approach to dealing with other anger, do it really resolve the conflict?
No. I have found that it helps me because otherwise I probably really go off.
You'll hurt somebody.
Not that part, but I probably say a lot of things.
You'll say a lot
Rather
of
than,
things.
and things that I would probably be ashamed of, and rather than making myself ashamed of myself, I go
Yes.
into that ignoring. you
Ignore.
know.
Now, all of these are forms of suppression, aren't
Oh,
Exactly,
yeah,
right.
Right.
Yeah.
they? Is anyone up here that is not a form of suppression?
No.
So we know exactly where we're going to start taking this now, right? So we know that those of us who have used silence or to ignore, to isolate, to separate from, to avoid, these are all avoidance styles, aren't they? Right? These are avoidance styles. Right? And they're styles of suppression. We're really suppressing this stuff, aren't we? And so when we suppress it, we know, first of all, that it has not really resolved the conflict that you had with the other person. We know that, right? And what usually happened to the other person that was on the other side of your anger? Are they still in your life? How many of these other people who angered you, went into silence about, that you ignored, that you isolated, that you avoided, are still a part of your life? Are they around?
Yeah.
Huh?
If I isolate you, you're not around.
Right?
I'm not
They're not around. Are they around?
Yeah.
See, I mean, you have to look and see, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are still around you, right?
Most of them
Some of
are.
these are,
Exactly.
And that's probably because they're a significant other, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's some of them, you just divorced them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You just got away
See
from
ya.
it. See you, right? So it doesn't matter that either way you're trapped because the stuff is still there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Now I want you to begin to, because you all know enough, what are some of the impacts that this suppressed anger is going to have on you now? What is it going to look like? What is the thing you're going to start finding in yourself?
Well, with isolation, sometimes what it does for me is it helps me to look at the picture and realize that it wasn't worth all I went through.
Mhm.
It wasn't worth the anger. Sometimes it allows me to grow and realize that maybe I did handle that wrong.
Okay.
Or, or maybe I should have handled it another way.
Okay. So we're not really going to, according to your definition of isolation, that's not such a negative way of managing your anger at others. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, it's just one way that I do.
It's one way that you do. But I mean, you now need to give it a value. Does it work in resolving the conflicts?
It works for
Well,
me.
if you divorced them, it didn't resolve the conflict. So
Because
that, it failed, didn't it?
None of those resolved.
None of these resolved. None of them resolved anything.
No.
But it can.
Isolate is just like postponing. Like she said, it gives her a chance to play herself
Defend-
back,
right.
her
Yes.
own
Right.
self. She's going to evaluate that because she knows that situation may come up again, and she's evaluating it. Did I really need to get all that worked up? What was that all about? You may be asking yourself those kind of
So
questions.
that's what
'cause
she
that
means
thing-
by isolation?
That's what she means.
So
Right.
I
really
think-
that's
Do
evaluating.
you think that's what I'm saying?
You know what I do sometimes?
You evaluate more instead.
All right, so we're
That's
gonna
a
take-
wrong word.
That's a wrong word.
It's evaluate.
What do we need to mean by isolate then? Let's give a proper definition to
We
it. Because-
divorce them.
Well, see, this is the
Don't
problem.
curb.
If you divorced, that means that the conflict didn't get resolved.
My isolation,
Now let's say
isolation
people's
to-
definition of isolation.
the
How you
way I
use
isolate, I
isolate.
mean, I just stay out of that space and keep them out of my space for a minute.
Right.
But these people are so interconnected with my life that I can't divorce them.
Right.
So I just go through that period of, because I'm going through something like that now.
Yeah.
Now that I've had time to reflect, I said, well, perhaps I could have handled that a different way. Now I got to swallow some pride
And go back.
and go back to that person and
Yes.
talk. you
That's
know,
the
and-
that's the
and
sense
solve
that's
it.
the sense that I mean
Mhm.
for isolation.
Okay.
You see, that's the sense I mean. It is a form of procrastination.
Right,
You see my point?
right.
It's avoidance.
Mhm.
You're refusing to do something that is necessary to be done because to do that is more painful than you can bear at the moment.
Right,
Right.
because even if you're right and they're wrong, if
Even
you
if you're right.
isolate yourself, it's still, you
It still
done
haven't
something.
resolved it. And so we want to look and see when we are victims of, when this is our dominant style. Now, before we go into all of that, I want you to start looking, how old were you? How far back in your life can you recall becoming aware of that style as your style? How old were you? Take yourself back and try to recall at about what age were you when you really start using these particular styles?
It comes like what she says out of child. Parents do
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
When you tell your child, when you invalidate your child's anger by telling them, you can't get mad at me, you ain't got no job, or whatever it is you telling that child, it produces that.
It produces these negative styles.
That's
I
where
want
it
you
comes
to,
from.
They stop
but I
talking
want,
about it.
but I want the analysis
Exactly.
to be more autobiographical. I want you to recall now what age you were.
You may not could do that.
I recall.
Go ahead, right ahead.
I recall, I guess I was around 7 or 8.
All right, now you're about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Tell me the event.
Well, there were 2 events. I would use silence as a means of getting my way because I knew my mother couldn't stand it.
All right, give us the specific example in that recollection. Give me the memory.
Memories.
Give me that memory. The earliest one.
I would do something and it would get very, very specific.
Well, the more specific, it shouldn't hopefully not embarrass you, but it's usually in your memory. You have a memory where there was an actual scene
Mm-hmm.
where you were acting this way.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's too personal, then of course you don't have.
Well, I said, but she would tell me to do, and I would go in my room and play and bide away the time, and she would come in an hour, half an hour, and come back, and it would not be done. And we would exchange a couple of words, and she would leave, and I would do it begrudgingly, and then afterwards I wouldn't have very much to say to her, and so I guess it was my way of punishing her. And I knew my mother couldn't stand it, and I would always go to my father or somebody, some other adult that was around, and I would talk to them, and I would
Not her.
Yeah.
and I would
Yes.
not talk to my mother, and
Yes.
that would just really just get her
Sure.
going.
Right. So you were using silence
Ignore.
as a means of getting revenge, which is, as I said from the outset, is a typical way we manage our anger. We seek revenge. Remember I said that the classic mismanagement of anger is to find a way to get revenge, whether covert or overt. So this became a covert way of you getting revenge, right? And whenever revenge is the aim and objective of your management style, you know that is a negative style. It's kind of productive and it will fail. And very often we do use silence as a means of getting revenge. And at what age did you outgrow this use of silence
I
to
haven't
get
outgrown it. I still do it.
We still do it. That's the point I'm making because
still
it's the
do it.
only tool in the bag.
Did
Yeah.
you know?
Right?
Yeah.
But now it's ironic because that is a skill that you develop when you're 6, 7 years old. It needs to be updated. That's all. You know, it needs to be re-examined to see if it is appropriate in your adult relationships. More about that as we go down. We're going to do some early recollections because I want you all to leave these workshops knowing more about yourself than you did before you came in here. I'm not interested in you knowing more about philosophy or psychology or astronomy or history or any of that stuff. I am only concerned that you know more about yourself. And if that does not happen, then I failed. I've simply wasted your time, my time, and our money, you see. So you will forgive me if I come back again and again to emphasizing knowledge of the self. With that said, let's return to a understanding of how this suppressed anger impacts on you now. How do you feel when you take your anger down? Let's say here you got some revenge, right? But when you ignore it, what happens?
But isn't silence, aren't those so interrelated?
Yes.
Because when you're silent, when you're silent and you don't talk to that person, you're kind of ignoring that and isolating that person.
Yeah, all of these are really kind of like sister phenomena, aren't they? So they're all kind of different versions of the same thing. That's what I call avoidance, right? It's all avoidance, and these are just forms of avoidance. But it's all avoidance primarily, right? But if that has been your ignore, isolate. I like to isolate because you simply avoid them. That's clearly avoidance. You don't go around,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
You don't go around. And that begins to, now Kiva gave us an insight. She said one of the things that come out of that kind of style, especially when it is a significant other, is you start having some feelings of guilt, right? What about pressure? Do you start having some pressure too? That because sooner or later you got to see them? I mean, you tell me, what, because if it's your dominant style, you know, you'll know more about it. You do the
Yeah, it's
authority on it.
pressure, and I personally become preoccupied with it. You know, the anger comes up and what I should have said and all of this and that, you know, and because of the suppression, it means if I haven't dealt with something else with this person, all that stuff comes
It's
back
perpetuates
up.
All of it
You
blows
know, it
up.
just blows back up.
So-
And I should have done this before, and then I would, you know, it's all
So
of that.
you replay the whole thing
Replay the whole thing.
and get yourself all angry again all over.
Right, right.
So that's just really not a good style.
And it
Right.
feeds on itself too.
Right,
The more you
right.
think about it, the angrier you get,
Right.
even if you don't think about it for a couple
Let me
times.
ask you this. What is your earliest recollection of using that style to deal with conflict in your life?
When you asked it, I was trying to reflect back. I think when I was young, I dealt more with silence. But I think the isolation, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I think the isolation came when I realized that sometimes you need those people So, and you get a little bit manipulative, and so you don't want to blow up because you don't want to push them out
Yeah.
of the way altogether because you might have to go back and use them for
Yes,
something.
yes. You don't want them to abandon
Right,
you.
abandon,
So
right,
you have
right.
fears of abandonment.
Right. I'm not very happy with having to say that, but that's.
No, that's the
That's
truth though.
life.
We all do that. It's not just you. I mean, these are unconscious and subconscious styles that we bring from our childhood. The point I want you to begin to see that if you looked at your dominant style, you need to be able to make the connection to their origins, the genesis, because that's very important for us being able to correct them. Were there any other styles of managing anger that did not fall in this group, or did we all come from the same family here? Huh? Do anybody else have a different style that they used? Was anybody confrontational?
Yeah.
Can you be a little bit of both?
Yeah.
A little bit of all of them.
Sometimes we use them all.
Yeah.
Sometimes we use them all. You know,
Because eventually all three of those are gonna lead to that.
yeah,
In a
some of us,
sense.
because different situations, particularly those where the fear of abandonment is not so great, we may switch into a style of confrontation.
Right, you don't
Very
care.
confrontation
That's right. I
with a
don't
person
need you.
that we don't need, right?
Right.
But I mean, we're looking for your dominant. Were there any screamers?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm? What about, there was screamers?
Yeah.
I got a screamer. We got a family of
Yeah.
screamers. You begin to see that it's something very interesting because I want you to really understand how you got that way. And let's say, for instance, if you're a screamer, you will look back into your family system and you will find that the people that makes up that family system, remember I said how you internalize a lot of stuff as a child? And let's say that if screaming was the predominant style in your family for venting anger, then you will emerge from that family system as a what? Screamer. Whenever you get angry, you will scream. Now, you have to look back in your family and look and see what was the dominant style of managing anger in your family. More particularly, I want you to look and see how did your mother handle her anger and how did your father handle his anger. How did they handle the anger?
I had two total opposites.
Okay.
My father passed away when I was very young, but my mother was a screamer. My grandfather and grandmother came to live with us, and my grandfather was silent and stern, but my mother was very confrontational, very outspoken, and she was the total opposite.
Your grandfather.
Uh-huh,
He was silent.
uh-huh, but
She
stern.
was the screamer.
Right,
Okay. You got brothers and sisters?
uh-huh.
How many?
2 brothers and 1 sister.
2 brothers and 1 sister. So you got 3 siblings?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Sibling number 1, whose style did they take?
Probably my mother's.
Okay, so you got 1 screamer.
Yeah.
Sibling number 2.
I'm number 2.
Let's
So,
make you number 4. Let's talk about the siblings.
number 2, my mother.
Not screamer.
Yeah,
Number 3,
my grandfather.
silent.
Uh-huh.
Is number 3 the male? And next is number 3
Yeah.
the brother?
The younger brother, yeah.
And the other 2 are the women?
Uh-uh.
1 and 2 are women?
No. 1 is a male
Oh, 1
and
and
2
2.
is female.
Okay, that's good. You want to know these kind of things.
Mhm.
And yourself, how would you rate yourself?
I'm like pulled between both of them. I kind of do both of
You
them.
schizo.
Yeah, I
You go
can
both ways.
from, I kind of go from one end to the other.
All right, so you use both of them.
Uh-huh.
All right, so you both.
At this point in my life, I'm really pulling away from both of them.
Okay.
And I think that started maybe about 10 years ago, where I realized that neither one of them was
Was
really
working.
me.
Okay.
It wasn't the way I wanted to handle it.
Linda, you said screamers. You want to guide us through this. What was the dominant style in your family?
Well, I was raised by my mother, so I don't know.
Okay.
You know.
All righty.
But
My mother, she was kind of like a screamer and silent. I mean, she would just have to, she'd just take so much
And explode.
and explode.
So we're talking about these are explosions. Right?
My siblings, the female, they were screamers.
All the girls are
All the
screamers.
girls were screamers.
all the girls are screamers, and the boys.
They were pretty silent. They weren't screaming.
Okay. So it seemed like there was something, because you're mimicking that mother's style. Interesting. Now let me ask you this, because that's a popular one, screaming. I'm married to a screamer. I can tell you, it's hell. Right? But it's a style that picked up in your childhood.
What about the whiner?
Whiners. Oh, that's
Yeah,
nice. There's some people whine, right? Whiners. When they get angry, they whine. That's how they manage their anger. They whine. That's like getting revenge. It gets revenge, get on somebody's nerve.
It's like fussing.
Like fussing.
Yeah.
All right. Arguing, things of that nature. But it's very interesting when you did your homework, and we're going to take our lunch break in a minute or two here. But I just want to kind of process a little bit of your homework. When you look at your homework again, okay, I want you to begin to look and see if the way you are handling the conflicts, I want you to look and see how they relate to the way it was handled within the context of your family system. Because I want you to get some distance from this thing now. I want you to understand that the way and style you have developed and have been using up until this moment are styles that are not even yours. They don't reflect none of your intelligence. You haven't been involved in the process of that at all. It's not yours. And the more you can understand that, the easier it is to drop it. Now, if it works, it works. But you have to be honest. Usually you will find that we get a lot of styles that are dysfunctional. But the clear thing to see, who style you are mimicking. Okay? And when we move into that part of the session where we start doing early recollections, I think you're going to be very surprised what you're going to find that has carried over from your childhood into your adulthood and is causing you unnecessary misery. And you will be pleasantly surprised to find out how easy it is to drop it. It's really not that hard. The key is honesty. The more honest we do our homework, the more progress we make. So on that, let's take our break. We come back at 2:05, I guess.
Let me see them numbers.
Emma has excellent notes.